Today, we're delighted to have as our guest the actor and playwright Daniel K. Isaac. If you watch the Showtime series Billions, you know Daniel for his role as Ben Kim, the incongruously sweet-natured and anxious hedge funder who's become a fan favorite. But Daniel is also increasingly becoming known for his stage work. In the past year alone, he starred in The Chinese Lady at the Public Theater, and he made a triumphant playwriting debut with his epic Once Upon a Korean Time for the Mayi Theater Company. Currently, Isaac is starring in the off-Broadway play You Will Get Sick by Noah Diaz, where he plays a young New Yorker who hires an older woman, played by Linda Lavin, to tell his family about his devastating medical diagnosis. It's poignant and moving and also very, very funny. The New York Times released a rave review earlier this week. Yay!
Yay!
Catherine and I became fans of Daniel in 2019 when he hosted the Roar Story Slam for Korean American Story. We thought he was so charming, and I, for one, was delighted with his hilariously racy asides. And of course, we were both struck by his deep, melodious voice. The more we learned about him, the more we wanted to meet him. Daniel grew up in Southern California as the only child of a single mother who immigrated from South Korea. As a gay teenager growing up in a deeply conservative and religious home, he struggled against his sexual orientation, even voluntarily undergoing conversion therapy. Spoiler alert, it did not work. He studied theater at UC San Diego and after graduation moved to New York, where he lives today. Along the way, Daniel turned his relationship with his disapproving and devout mother into the viral hashtag, according to my mother. We are, of course, dying to hear more about this project and everything else you've been up to. Thank you so much, Daniel, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Daniel, I thought we would start by talking about Billions, since that's where most people would know you from.
Sure.
So, the show's heading into its 7th season.
Yep.
Is that right? And I want to ask you about Ben Kim.
Okay.
So he is a Stanford and Wharton graduate. And so he has all the credentials that you'd expect a young guy at a top-notch hedge fund to have.
Right.
Yet he's so sweet and almost innocent, and he doesn't have that alpha male charisma that his colleagues have. So I'm wondering, is there any of yourself in that character? And if so, what? Or, and also, do you know any Korean hedge fund bros in your life? And have you met any of those kinds of guys?
I don't think I know any Korean hedge fund bros in my life right now. But I do think our writers are very good creative writers and also like to magpie from our lives a bit. So I remember in season 1, we had a lot of big personalities on set. And I think I'm a true ambivert, but in extroverted settings, I am happy to be the introvert. And one of my co-stars, Dan Soder, is a stand-up comedian. So if you're hanging out with Dan, there's no point in trying to have a conversation. You can just laugh and enjoy yourself and eat your meal or drink your coffee. And so I think some of that, the listening, the quiet, the in the room and a positive presence, but not exactly the most vocal, did show up in the character. And as the writers, the creators, especially Brian Koppelman and David Levine, have gotten to know me over the years, I sort of wonder if they are like surrogate dads who then dispense life advice through what my character goes through. And so part of Ben Kim's journey is opening up more and tackling his fears a bit more and
taking his shirt off.
Yeah, taking his shirt off and becoming, if not alpha, then at least owning his space more.
You must have met by now many fans of the show. I know you have a wide audience, but I imagine there's a certain number of guys who work in finance who love that show because what are those fans like?
Because I'm doing this play right now at Roundabout Theater Company, which is on 46th and 6th Avenue. I'm keeping my mask on when I get off at Times Square and then walking up 6th because it's just a sea of finance bros. It's just Patagonia vests and well-tailored like gingham and like pants that are all very expensive, but all the same shade of blue. And they walk I'm making fun of them now, sorry, but they walk in groups and they just look like a Brooks Brothers catalog, but more well-tailored. And they love the show. So, I mean, I have no animosity towards them, and I have a deep appreciation and respect for them. David Costable, who plays Wags, always flips people off because that's what his character does, and they love that. But he's also flipping people off, like, leave me alone, I'm with my family or my friends. Because I play a nice character, I have to turn off my New Yorker, don't make eye contact and don't touch me or talk to me thing, and I can engage for a little bit, but I don't work in finance. I have no tips to give
on your off hours.
No, I do own one. My ex worked for a firm, and so I have that, and I use it for cosplay more than anything, I think.
So we wanted to ask you about Once Upon a Korean Time. So this is a play that interweaves classic Korean folk tales like Shimcheong with the stories of Koreans throughout the last century, taking us through the lives of Korean soldiers in the 1930s, comfort women in the 1940s, all the way through the LA riots and today. What was your relationship with Korean folk tales like? Were you raised like learning them when you were a kid? Because I wasn't very familiar with them. Mm-hmm. I grew up mainly in the U.S. And was this a part of like the process of like embracing your heritage? Because it's a very Korean-centric play.
Yeah. I remember my mom and 2 or 3 other Korean immigrant moms banded together in our LA Koreatown neighborhood and taught Korean school to us on Saturdays, I believe. And each mom took turns, and mine was the meanest and another mom was the nicest. And they would use children's books that had Korean and English side by side. And so that's where I remember encountering Korean folk tales and fairy tales. But I sort of buried them deep in my memory and hadn't addressed them again since. And I also have some vague recollections of maybe a VHS or 2 that were Korean folktales that were animated. And so when I was starting this project, I interviewed a bunch of Koreans and Korean Americans, asking them what they remembered about folktales and fairy tales. Because when I went to college, I was obsessed with Edith Hamilton's mythology, and I read the Percy Jackson books. I know all the Greek and Roman gods and their counterparts, Disney and Marvel and Harry Potter and all these other sources of fiction, but not what we come from. And so I wanted to write the play as a way to explore something that I knew was a complete absence in my personal education, other than those early Korean school days, and in my own sort of internalized racism ways of not being curious enough in where I came from and re-educate myself, and then maybe get to share that with others.
So you did research, and
but I also am bad at reading Korean. I'm like so slow reading. So then all I could go back to were children's books again. Like my mom and I went to Koreatown bookstores and we're like, anything on fairy tales? And they were like the kids section. So then I just kept picking up. I have this huge shelf of just children's books, but I'd read them and think, these are so fucked up. They're so dark and so morbid or violent or twisted that felt idiosyncratically perhaps Korean. And so then I was trying to tap into what were the gruesome, what were the violent, what was the absurd that maybe then is actually the more honest or helps parallel to very dark times.
Was there a moment when you felt like you wanted to reclaim your Korean heritage, or do you feel like you were interested steadily?
No, I definitely went through a period where I was super embarrassed about being Korean. I knew how to code switch. I imagine that's something kids of immigrants know how to do. And so I could code switch enough that my mom likes to joke that if I saw someone Korean or Asian, I would speak to them in Korean. And if I saw someone white, I would speak to them in English as a toddler before school. And so there's something there that must ingrain in my identity that says, here's how you interact with one folk versus another. In elementary school, I was one of a very small group of Koreans. And then my mom had a relationship for a period of time that moved us to Diamond Bar, California, which had a huge Korean population. And other than Korean megachurches that I'd grown up with, I was used to compartmentalizing Koreans being at church, but not in my school. And I had a very, I'm sure, jarring identity crisis in being one of many again, in a place where I was used to being one of few. And instead of leaning into oh, here are people who can empathize with you or come from your backgrounds, I actually ran away from them. And probably that's why I ended up in the arts or in sports, because that's where they weren't as much. Growing up, I felt very repelled, or I think I even bragged about saying these Korean American kids are only hanging out with each other, but isn't the point of being in America to be in this melting pot? Which is like, on one hand, sure, and on the other hand, still has twinges of self-hatred there.
So what age were you when that shift occurred?
I had skipped 2 grades in elementary school, and so I went to 5th grade very early. What's the math? I graduated high school at 16. So if you go back from, again, I'm not good at math, but 12 minus 5 is 7. So 16 minus 7 is 9. So at 9, it was like pre-puberty. That makes sense because I got my first like giant monitored computer and giant modem thing around junior high. And that's when like puberty hit and I discovered pornography. So that's math
how
makes
you
sense. Yeah.
Discovered your sexuality.
Yeah. I quickly went to gay porn instead of, like there's like a bunch of naked women. And I thought, I'm not interested in this. So who says it's not biological? I don't know.
We want to know more about your family because obviously for Koreans, having a mom who's divorced, and especially in a very religious setting, traditional sounds like.
Yeah.
And we've heard like maybe we've read certain different accounts of, did she come over alone? Is she divorced? Was she ever married?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about her journey here?
She's very good at, and I imagine many kids' parents are good at rewriting the narrative. But what I am sort of sussing out is the truth in the narrative is she immigrated in 1980, and she told me she came alone. But one day we were driving around LA somewhere, and she said, oh, one of my first homes was here. And she had, while not married, had been set up with a guy who had, I believe, 2 kids and a mother-in-law, and he moved back and forth between South Korea and Los Angeles. And maybe she moved to be in a relationship with him, and she thought it would be a way for her to springboard her career because she had worked at a bank in Korea and fought for equal wages for women at the workplace, especially in that bank environment. They said, fuck you, and promoted a younger woman as a like, sure, we'll give you equal wages, but not to you. And she, in a huff, in a very Korean way, said, I'm leaving. And so her narrative from there says, then I moved to California or to the United States and started from scratch and ended up at a bank in downtown LA in a Japanese bank and pulled herself up that way. But what I'm maybe also learning is she came here, and I wonder where her citizenship came from and if it was from this man and mother-in-law and 2 kids. And what she deeply hated was she was conned into thinking she could have her own life, but really he just wanted someone to cook and clean and be a co-parent or a mother figure and take care of what she says is a monstrous mother-in-law. So
she didn't marry him.
She didn't, because she swears she's only been married once, which is also rewriting because that move to Diamond Bar, I thought was because she had married this man from Canada. And later she says that he was trying to use her for her citizenship so that he could become an American citizen. So she never married him, to which I say, then you've had a lot of premarital sex and you are coming after me for gay sex, but like pot kettle black here.
Wait, so then who is your father? And was she pregnant when she
So
came
then
here?
she comes in 1980 with maybe this other family or not. She definitely figures something out on her own and ends up at, they were called Tokai Bank, I remember. And she's set up by one of her best friends, Sue Choi, who was a ping pong champion of South Korea for a period of time. She and my mom were besties, and I love their stories together. And she set my mom up with this guy who's my biological father, Steve Kim. And I don't have a relationship with him, but they married quickly. They had me very quickly. I believe I was supposed to have a younger brother who was diagnosed with Down syndrome. And so then she had a late-term abortion. also a woman who's anti-abortion, and she's had an abortion. So confounding human. But then my biological father cheats on my mom with the head pastor's daughter at the church we grew up in. And everyone knows about the affair. My mom finds out and continues to go to the church so that I can still see my dad once a week, which is, again, super fucked up and also so amazing of her. But this man really wanted nothing to do with me. And now I've learned there was all this scandal at the church that I wasn't aware of.
Was this in LA, a church in
LA? They were called something Philadelphia Church. My mom finally, or in some act of dignity, I think, did leave the church.
So your dad was not part of your life after age 2 or so?
Yeah, they separated when I was 2. I think they officially divorced when I was 3. He was good at seeing me, you know, at church once a week maybe, which I have very, very vague memories of. And then he, when I was a little older, would take me to Disneyland once a year, or like Knott's Berry Farm, or SeaWorld, or I think he took me to Catalina Island once, things like that. And then that petered off. And somewhere around puberty, 11, 12, 13, I had my rebellious phase. And of course, my mom had only told me her perspective of the divorce and what had happened, with minus the affair. So she did hide that from me for a very long time. In a huff, really wanted to see my dad and ask him, you know, the tough questions that I'd never asked before in this, you know, newly independent spirited teenage mess that I was. And he kept postponing and postponing. And finally, I got mad at him on the phone. And he lost his temper with me. And I, in turn, lost my temper with him. And I said, you have no right to discipline me, essentially, if you aren't a father in my life. And that's the last time I spoke to him.
Oh, wow.
And he had a pager then. So this is how it dates it. And my mom and I could only reach him by pager. And eventually he got rid of the pager because I think I tried drunk dialing it once when I was in college, and it wasn't connected anymore. And by then everyone was getting cell phones. So I have no idea where he is. And my mom loves to joke whenever I have a print campaign. I had a big one for Bank of America and one for Grubhub. And they always put it in Asian-centric locations, right? So Koreatown always gets a billboard with my face on it. And she'll laugh and be like, your dad doesn't know that's you, which I think is very funny, but people also think is so sad. But I deeply find that hilarious in a twisted way.
So he may know it's you,
Yeah,
though.
I
I
don't
don't
know.
know.
I mean, like 13 to now,
Yeah.
I guess if I post some side by side.
Maybe you look like
I was trying to
him
find
now.
photos for
Right.
y'all. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I wonder.
We need these Grubhub print
I know.
as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of questions there.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like
you
we
ha-
know how judgy
Yeah.
the Korean community
Oh,
is,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And
we all get
everybody
it.
knows each other's business, and there are big gossips, and in a church especially.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That must
Church
have
or the
been-
grocery store. I feel like that's where currency was traded.
But also, you've highlighted and pointed out some of the, contradictions in your mom's beliefs versus her actions. But also, it's, being a single woman, single mom, going through divorce, also affairs, and abortion.
Yeah.
She's had a lot of stuff that would be frowned upon and
Totally.
condemned by fellow
Yeah.
Koreans, and so she's walking a really tight
Yeah.
rope there.
Right.
And then she's got a son who's gay, and it's almost like I don't know if she owns up to any of her life issues.
Yeah.
So I mean, is one of
It's
the
where I
reasons
have-
why you have tensions that she feels like she can kind of maybe use you as an outlet?
Yeah. It's where I have the most compassion for her faith, which is truly confounding at times, because right now she's also an anti-vaxxer and a huge Trump supporter. And there is another critical analysis we need to make about how Fox News and conservative news is translated into Korean and goes unchecked and is maybe brainwashing our parents' generations. But for now, at my most generous, I am understanding of how her faith and her newer church community, at least, could be there for her in a way that a husband was not. No other family members were. All of her grandparents had died. You know, she has war trauma. Her little sister died. Like, there's a complete reason why she has clung to her faith and rooted herself in that world so fiercely. And I credit that to her survival, her resilience, and her joy. And so when I can be at my most patient, I am very thankful that she has that, because I am of some means now to take care of her, but not enough. And we cannot live in the same building, let alone state, still perhaps. And so these other people have become her family. At its purest, isn't that what religion was supposed to be? And isn't that what an immigrant community should be? And yet gossip and backstabbing and misdeeds also occur.
There too.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you grow up in LA, or did you move somewhere where there were not that many Koreans?
We did Koreatown proper for a long time, and then Diamond Bar for a little bit, and then Fullerton. And my mom is still in Fullerton.
So what was it like growing up, you know, the only child of a single mom?
Yeah.
It sounds like maybe, I mean, you said that she was the strict kind of like mean teacher.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you probably had a really close relationship while you were young. And you must have been like, she must have been so proud of you to skip 2 grades at that young age.
Yeah. She was good at diverting her pride and saying, you know, like if I got a good test score, she'd say, how does that make you feel? And I'd say, good. And then she'd take it a step further and not say her. She'd say, and how do you think that makes God feel?
Oh, wow.
And so it was about,
God.
Sure, your own joy, but like pleasing God. And so that sets an impossibly high standard. And she's removed herself from the equation in that and said, you know, it's not about pleasing your parents. I'm not going to be a tiger mom or this domineering thing, but it's still a manipulation that gets the results that you want.
And what was your feeling about God when you were young?
I wholeheartedly was all in on it for a while. And I think the betrayals I learned from the interpersonal relationships and the toxicity, as you mentioned, are maybe tainted in why I can't, but also those same communities could not accept me for who I was. And if faith is supposed to be a place of complete acceptance, then these spaces failed at that. And I get to decide on my own time when I want to re-engage or where I want to re-engage and how I want to. And so I leave that as sort of an ongoing question, much to the chagrin of my mother, who desperately wishes I would become a full-fledged Christian again and use my platform to spread the gospel rather than like gay grooming is now the language she owns. So possesses, which is, again, there's super fucked up trickle-down stuff going into Korean translation. And Facebook, I hate Facebook for her. So, yeah.
So, the conversion therapy that you
voluntarily went to, so I take responsibility.
At what age and what did that entail exactly?
I want to say 13, 14 to 16. So I left it after high school. And I'd gone to...
Sorry, and was it a Korean program?
No, I went to the pastors in the youth group. So Korean churches, for folks who might not be familiar, there's the Korean-speaking congregation and then the English-speaking congregation. So the kids were usually on the English side. And so it's like a whole other church with grade school, middle, high school, college, etc. In the high school program, they would use college... members of the church as like teachers or mentors, assigned by gender in that binary way. And so I went to my assigned college guy, Paul, and told him, and he went to then the head pastor of the high school, middle school congregation, Robert. I haven't thought of these names in so long.
Robert,
I know, such Korean names, right? I won't say their last names, will be nice. And I've already said the church, so it doesn't matter. And they then contacted or were in touch with another pastor who was a white guy who came, I think was like a guest for a weekend or some rally or something big. And all the teachers and head pastors went to a meal with him and his, I think he called them spiritual sons, I believe. So he had an assistant or associate pastors with him. And somehow I was asked to come along with them. And in this car ride with, I want to say, Robert and Paul, Rich was my main conversion therapist's name. And this other guy, I think I came out in that setting too. And that white pastor said he specialized in this. And so then helped me meet some other people who were like ex-gays. I sort of had therapy with him on a regular level. And all of these people were available either on speed dial or on weekly check-in for prayer sessions. For the Korean church believed in like casting out demons. So there was all of that, charismatic
Exorcism.
stuff. Yeah. And like praying in tongues and fainting and shaking. And I went full in there and still turned out gay. So, here I am, still love men and anal sex. So didn't work. But.
And your mom probably wanted you to keep it a secret did she not want to tell her friends?
So I was already in therapy by the time I came out to my mom.
Oh, you came out to the church
before I came out to my mom.
Do you think they secretly told your mother?
I'm not sure. I actually want to say they didn't. I think they respected that measure of privacy, which I give them kudos for that.
I would give them credit for that. I wouldn't trust those guys to.
Right. Because the Korean Americans, or I think one of them was even Korean Canadian, didn't really know what to do with a gay kid or the sin of homosexuality in large quotes. And so they outsourced for help. And what I later learned, because Paul went to jail for a while and Robert got stuck out of the country because he wasn't like on top of his immigration paperwork. These people were in charge of spiritual lives. They later told me, Rich got kicked out of his church for being gay.
I knew it.
Oh God, it's such a cliche, and I just didn't see it, But I was this hormonal teenager talking about how many times I jerked off in a week and how bad I felt, and marking up a calendar with black X's, guilting myself, or getting rid of TV and throwing away VHSs, and not having internet at home, and doing all these steps that were prescribed to me by these folks to undo or rid myself of temptation or fight the sin of homosexuality. And all the while, of course, the guy is gay. And how did I not? This continually happens to me in my life, where I think the most cliche answer ends up being the truth of it. And so,
Daniel, how are you not like this resentful, angry person?
Therapy, lots of therapy, the arts community, a lot of time, but yeah.
Well, I had read that when you went to college and you came out to your mother, she disowned you and cut you off. Now, I have to say, when I was a kid, that idea that you could be disowned was made very clear to me many times.
Really? That was a threat that loomed over?
Yeah, and,
always.
So it is a Korean thing.
And I would lie. Sometimes, I can't remember what I did that was so bad, but I would lie in my room and look around at my possessions and try to think, if I really got kicked out, what could I take?
Yeah.
How could I get it out? And where would I go? And I would have like a little plan in mind.
Yeah.
But, and then of course later when I realized my white friends, there was no concept of disowning, that didn't even know that as a word.
Yeah.
But it's and then I used to hear my mom would tell me stories about so-and-so's friends did disown their child and telling me stories about how the mother would take pity on the child and sneak them food without letting the father know that because they were disowned, they weren't allowed in the house. I mean, real stories that sounded very real to me, but I never really met anyone who had been disowned. And you might be my first one.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah. So did she just say that? How does she put it? Like
how did you manage?
What?
You're a teenager.
Yeah.
I'm cutting you out. What did she say?
The first time I came out to her, I was in therapy, and it was, I had watched gay porn at her real estate agent office, and someone got fired for looking at lewd materials. And so I thought I had gotten someone fired. So then that's why I came out to her, to take responsibility, at least in that fashion. And it turns out it wasn't that. Like, I think she was watching straight porn at her secretary desk. So whatever. But at that time, I could say, I am fighting it. I believe it's a sin. Here are the steps I've already taken. And she took it sort of in stride and said, I always worried about this because I could never provide a father for you. I could never keep a husband. So this was a fear I had because the stereotype or a misconception that was touted was single mothers raise gay boys. It hurt, but also it was nice that she understood.
And she still, you had support from her.
Yeah, that
Right,
we could
she
sort
was
of
taking
speak
the
the same
blame.
language in the church environment and whatnot. And then I gave a blowjob to a guy at Six Flags and got in a lot of trouble for it. So
You got caught?
no, this other family, so my like semi-adoption parallel is a white family that took me in from junior high and high school for large swaths of time. And I called them mom and dad, and I had a brother there. But because I'd skipped 2 grades, we were the same age, but I was 2 years ahead of him. And we would go to amusement parks a lot. And his mom worked at a place close to Six Flags. So we'd go to Six Flags. We were very good at making friends with other people. And one time we made friends with a guy and a girl, and the other guy turned out to be gay. And he and I flirted all day. And then I gave him a blowjob in the bathroom. And it caused us to be late for pickup from mom. And he is still a very good human and never lied to his parents. Like, I don't think he's ever done drugs. He can barely drink right now. And I think I gave him like his first shandy and cigarette, and I'm a horrible influence. But he told his mom, I need you to never ask why we were late. Otherwise, I will be forced to lie, and I'm not someone who lies to you. And so then that incident, along with my mom's worries about me going to college and stuff, caused this sort of like family council to regularly meet or talk. And that family didn't want me to go to UCSD because they thought that was too far. And mind you, in conversion therapy, I rescinded all of my applications outside of California because my therapist said, don't go too far from your church network. It'll hurt your faith. And San Diego was only 2 hours away, so I could get away with that, I guess. And yet this white family thought I couldn't even do that. And again, to my mom's credit, she said, no, he's going to go and he'll be fine, even at 16. And so when I was in college and again, having like a little bit more sexual experiences to then figure out, well, if this is the biology of it all, how do I fight this or resist this, or is this sin? And as I questioned that, I had to come out to my mom. And one of those fights was, have you ever had a sexual experience to validate this is how you feel? And so I told her about the blowjob at Six Flags. And the other was, how do you not know it's a sin? How do you not know that this is your burden to bear, and this is what Christ has given you, and this is how you have to move through life? And it was a lot of screaming on the phone. And I was doing a play at the time in college, my freshman year of college. And so she was supposed to come, and she said she wasn't going to come. And then she still did come with flowers and snacks and like played the mom thing. And then in my dorm room, which was a shared room in a shared unit, we had like a huge full-on screaming match in the way that only Korean kids and parents do.
In Korean.
In Korean and in English. She'd brought a Bible with Post-it notes marking like all the places I'd sinned in our conversation. So it was a lot of like honor your parents stuff, but then it was all the like, where people point to say homosexuality is a sin. And usually that's translation. And, that's a whole other theological argument. But I remember distinctly a Bible covered in Post-it notes. So then the end of that was, you are not my son anymore. And I said, all right. And she left, and I cried a lot. And like, I lived with a bunch of bros, like they were frat bros and stuff. And they all heard it, and they were all very good about it. I think there was an RA in the building, and they said, you got to go talk to financial aid. And I talked to financial aid, and they said, oh, we have paperwork for that. And you have to do therapy. That was their it was a direct correlation of, this is what you've been disowned. You have to go to therapy.
But not conversion therapy.
Not conversion therapy, like real therapy.
Yeah.
I shouldn't even be calling conversion
Right.
therapist my therapist. But so then I go to real science-based therapy, and that A, saved my life, but B, also put a new perspective on how I could relate with my mother. And the thing she never did, which she should have or could have done, which was maybe my clue in it all, is she never cut off my cell phone. So while she didn't pay for my tuition, and I worked in the cafeteria at first, and then in the theater department, in the costume shop. She never turned my cell phone off. So there was some sort of, and whether that was selfishly motivated or not, she didn't cut me off there. People heard, and the costume department hired me and either created a job or just there was an opening and hired me because they knew what my situation was.
You were so young.
16. Oh, I would have been 17 by that time. Lucky me, 17. Yeah. I think by the end of that summer, we were reunited, but she still never really touched my tuition. And I figured that out for the most part. Loans and grants.
So you were an emancipated minor? Is that what happened?
She wouldn't sign the paperwork. So because I was so that was between like 17 and 18, she would have needed to sign something, and she wouldn't do that. I was just sort of a free-floating minor, and I couch hopped. I remember I used my mattress pad, and my cousin had given me her car, like a 2-door Honda Civic, and I would have all my possessions in the car, and I would take this mattress pad and some sheets and sleep on people's couches and floors until the dorms were open again early. And oh no, one of my roommates let me crash in his summer dorm. So he gave up his single and made it a double. So like a lot of people took care of me, and I don't even remember their names anymore, but I thank them a lot.
You must have experienced so much culture shock when you went to college. You must have had a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So how was that, like seeing other people and realizing that's, the environment that I grew up in, not everyone holds these beliefs.
Yeah.
And now it's up to you to kind of shape who you can be. I don't know if you felt that.
Yeah. I mean, kids must do that when they go to boarding school, right? Like if you're fortunate enough or want to go down that path. And so for me, it was like a high school transfer boarding school experience. And, I didn't have money, so I had to share my room. So I learned what it was like to have a roommate. And I might have been, if not a bad roommate, I think I drove my roommate crazy because I had really weird hours. And UC San Diego used to have a quarterly dance party that was for LGBT folks. I doubt the T was ever acknowledged then. So like lesbian, gay, and bi folks. And kids from the school, but also not from the school, would come. And so I would go, and that's how I met guys at first. That's where maybe the sexual playground could start, but barely, because I still had so much shame about it too, that if I engaged in something, I tended to cut it off or run away from or not let it last too long. Or I didn't also figure out my own self-worth in relation to my sexuality for a while. So the options were available. I was definitely a minor. I hope no one can retroactively get in trouble for that, right? And then there was the theater department that actually had a remarkably few people who were gay. And if they were, then I knew them. And instead, La Jolla Playhouse had shows coming with lots of cast members from New York. And so it was these pockets. It was the theater community where I learned by example, oh, you live as an out proud gay man. You are married with children. You can have this whole life, and have figured out how to navigate. I went to church one day with Titus Burgess. So to know he was a gay out man who also went to church and sang his face off, like how mind-blowing that was for me to know that one could reconcile their sexuality with their faith, even if I hadn't yet. And then when Prop 8 happened, which was my first election I could vote in, was Prop 8 and Obama, first time around. And I was super devastated by Prop 8 passing, which for those who don't know, it limited or it restricted gay marriage from happening. I was doing the Laramie Project, this play about Matthew Shepard and this docudrama around what happened to this young man who was beaten and killed for being gay. And one of my cast members and roommates at the time said, let's go to the protest. And I had never, A, being from the immigrant background, but B, just in my sheltered life, had never attended a protest before. And at that Prop 8 protest, which I remember crying a lot, seeing this many people like marching and seeing San Diego's main boulevard, which was quite hilly, so you could see the crowds up and down, and they'd only closed one side of the street, so people were driving on the other side and honking and crying. And there was a church that held up a banner, like a bunch of banners, and had a billboard, and all I'll paraphrase it, but it was something along the lines of, we are deeply sorry for those who have used the name of God to restrict love or in the name of hatred rather than
just
love.
to know that they did that.
And they were called Mission Gathering Church. And I thought, let me try going there. And that was one of my also final places of community where the pastor was gay. There were gay and lesbian congregants with kids. I saw a whole other life being possible for me that, again, my mom would never have known existed, and feared that I wouldn't have, I'm sure, on some base level of motherhood. And I even took her to that church, and yet she cried the whole time. And I thought, oh, is it because, look at these happy gays and lesbians.
Yeah.
Look, I found a community and I'm back at church. And instead she thought it was the devil's work, and that this community had gone so far astray. And she couldn't even imagine how Christianity could be bastardized in this extreme capacity. So we continue to find friction there, but those were the spaces where I could, learn about my sexuality and sex and meet people. But it still took much more therapy and experience and life experience to figure it all out.
It's remarkable to me how strong your mom's belief is.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly you have your own beliefs, and they're very different.
Mm-hmm.
But you two both continue to engage to try to keep the conversation going. And I mean, on your Instagram, you're going on vacations together with your boyfriend. And I read somewhere that even in college that you two traveled together.
Yeah, I was studying abroad in London. This is her final, I insert war metaphor here. She had me, I was studying abroad in London. She came towards the end. I did a show. She saw it. And then because I'd already done the touristy Western European destinations, I took her to Berlin, Prague, Budapest, flew to Geneva, Amsterdam, London. Wow. It was when Ryanair and flights could be 99 cents and stuff. And some students had already done that. And so I followed their Berlin, Prague, Budapest trip via train, and then hopped around where flights were cheap. And in Berlin, which was our first stop, we got drunk on beer and ojinga and peanuts. And
there's ojinga in Berlin?
Where she packed it because she's a resilient Korean war survivor. So dried squid everywhere you go. And she had me convinced that first night in Berlin, she stayed in hostels with me, God bless her. And she managed to maneuver my psychology in a way that said, I know you want to be an actor. You cannot be a successful actor if you're gay. So you have to be a Christian. You have to come back and you have to renounce your sexuality. And then God will grant you success in this dream you have and use it for his mission. And the way she crafted that, I fully was ready to move back. So that was my third year of college. For my fourth year of college, renounce homosexuality, focus on being as successful as possible and as Christian as possible, and then, start my adult life after that. And instead, our last stop was in Amsterdam, and a friend named Bryce met us there and stayed in the hostel with us and did touristy things with us. And we definitely sucked each other off while my mom was showering. So Berlin started with me saying, not going to be gay, and Amsterdam ended with oral sex while mom was showering. So, God is good, or gays are going to gay. And that answered that question. And I came back and did Laramie Project, and Prop 8 happened, and I have been gay ever since.
I know
Custard's last stand. That would have been a good metaphor. She truly had a last stand. It was her Alamo.
Can you tell us about Margaret Cho? We read you were in a web series that she did called
Mercy Mistress,
where she played a dominatrix. I love that you worked with her because it seemed like she would be such a great fairy gay godmother to young entertainers or actors, comedians who are gay, who have disapproving parents, and then manage to use material, use their parents
Yes.
as material for their
She
creative
saved
work.
my life. Her
So how did you
early
meet her?
stand-up.
Tell us about that.
I had DVDs that I got from Blockbuster to watch Margaret's stand-up. And the way she made fun of her mother really helped me feel seen and think I'm not alone. And her joke about not having role models growing up, and that she only had Hello Kitty and it's a expletive cat with no mouth is something that still resonates with me of, oh yeah, you didn't have role models and I barely did. And now look at how many we have. Thank goodness. So Margaret's amazing. I thought she was so funny in Fire Island, and that to me sort of epitomizes her fairy godmotherness as
definitely.
this like Fire Island mama hen.
And when you worked with her on the web series, did you get to tell her your story? Did you get to
I think
know
she'd
her?
read about it. She'd actually, when we were first doing the Kickstarter and short film pilot presentation version that Kathy Yan and I did, Margaret helped promote that. And so she was always, you know, a champion from afar and a champion up close. And, you know, I'm very thankful for her existence and also her championing. So.
Yeah. She grew up in the church as well.
Yeah,
so
right.
she has some
Empathy.
crazy stories.
Yeah. You know, John Cho did as well.
Oh, yeah.
His father was a pastor.
Yeah, I bought his book. I need to read it. Set during the LA riots. Like, oh, wow, our crossover is...
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I wondered when we were watching Once Upon a Korean Time, there was a scene towards the end where there are all these couples who are having brunch together with their children. And there's one segment where they're talking about a mom and some of the things that she said. And I wondered, are they direct quotes from your mom?
I'm trying to remember what I wrote there.
I thought it was so...
Yeah, you know what? I think that one was a rewrite I made because I had a commitment ceremony earlier this year. And those were things that my mom would say about gay marriage or commitment or long-term relationships between gay or lesbian partners. And so my mom didn't attend my commitment ceremony and now can, I don't know, rest on her high horse that we're separating. But she doesn't believe gay unions are real, can last, that they have a strong enough foundation or are, you know, it's just shy of bestiality is where she would put the carnal acts of it. And, but you know, I've talked about oral sex a bunch here, so I've proven her point. Right?
Well, what I was found shocking and hilarious is your hashtag, according to my mother, where you've basically screenshotted your text.
Yeah.
And she gets very, very graphic.
Yeah. She deeply must have researched what anal sex was. And she still, I think about it whenever I see an unhoused person with stained jeans, she swears, you know, she would call them homeless, that they are gay, have been kicked out or addicted to drugs or, you know, have gone on the wayside because of their sexuality. And they have stained jeans because of all the anal sex they engaged in. And now they are forever damaged by that. Is true rhetoric that if I walk with her and we pass someone who is seemingly or is not, you know, is lying on the ground or something, it's like I psychically know that's exactly what she's thinking and have to just steer us away from that.
You know, when I first found your Twitter account,
the According to My Mother stuff,
yes, I was reading through it and it was so fascinating. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how can he have a relationship with her still with the things that she says directly to him? And then I thought, what if I read this in like a Korean mom's voice?
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, wow, you know, my mom says similar things to me all the time.
Yeah.
And this is almost like this like very blunt kind of like honesty, almost like trying to help you, but it's so cutting.
Yeah.
That is very, you know, at least for my family, that my mom is like that. And I thought, oh, that's just kind of like regular Korean families then.
Totally.
And so, but I do think that there's an extra pressure that your mom must feel being a single parent.
Of course.
And maybe some blame that she must...
She still blames herself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which is why I think she's probably a lot harsher.
Of course.
Than...
Because if she's hard on me, then she's that hard on herself. What is sad is, you know, because of our distance, we've had to carve out new lives apart from one another. And what is unfortunate for her is that if you Google me, she comes up and she really hates this. There was a point where she asked to erase the internet or erase her presence off the internet too. But
she, you know, she partakes in that series, right?
Kind of. Or she, you know, like she signed away her life rights.
Yeah.
And if some studio will let me make this TV show, then she'll cash in on it. Mm-hmm. But she'll also ask me, one time I drove her to church one day and she asked me to drop her off a block away so that the church congregants wouldn't see me. And I thought, this is the reversal of the embarrassed teenager being like, our car's shitty. I'm not letting you drop me off in front of the cool kids. And so that's where she lives. And I often think about parents of, say, LGBT plus kids have to come out themselves as parents of LGBT plus kids. And my mom is fully in the closet, even though the internet would say otherwise. And she doesn't watch anything I do because she doesn't believe cable TV is real or successful or famous. And so when her church friends tell her about, say, Billions or something I've done, then it confounds her. And then it means that her closeted door could get burst open. And I imagine, you know, according to my mother, is out there. So people can connect the dots if they want to, but I think they pity her. And then there's the elderly respect thing and inherent to our culture. So I don't know how she operates in the world, still closeted, but that is how she chooses to move through it.
I think we have had guests where they've come out to their Korean parents, and even if they're religious, their parents have really come around and their love prevailed. And I love hearing that. And it's not like it wasn't difficult, but you're still in the process. And and your mom has, it's not just religion. She has a lot of other things that she needs to.
She survived a war.
Absolutely.
I always think about that. You survived a war. You get some tokens of forgiveness. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming, Daniel.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of stories.
Thank you for having me.
You've been through a lot, and
we all have,
you're so resilient.
Thanks for highlighting the stories so that people in the community can feel seen. And this, I'm sure, maybe helps someone else feel less alone.
Thank you to Daniel K. Isaac for joining us on K-Pod, a production of KoreanAmericanStory.org. You can see Daniel on stage in You Will Get Sick at the Roundabout Theater through December 11. Our audio engineer is AJ Valente. Our executive producer is H.J. Lee. You can follow us on Instagram at Korean American Story. You can follow Juliana at Juliana_Son. And you can follow me at Catherine Hong 100. Thanks.